Good afternoon. I'm John Medina, Miami Curtain Wall Consultants, and I'm here with Jorge Moya, a forensic investigator and engineer slash chemist. We've been involved in doing forensics after hurricanes for together about 7 years, and I've been doing it for most of my career for the last 30 so years. I've been in the business for 40 years as a licensed architect, and I've taught at the University of Miami, a number of places, and the subject I like to talk about is the exterior envelope of buildings. We find ourselves today not being able to be present face to face because we have Hurricane Milton barreling into our coastlines. Paradise Lost is what I think about with John Milton, and this storm is going to be a big one, and so we can't be with you today. So we've recorded our presentation, and I have to say that I'm really grateful that you all selected our paper to talk about, in essence, traceability, inspections, forensic inspections, and traceability. The hurricanes we've been involved in since I was a boy, I think I went through 2 Category 5s, on Miami Beach when I was about just a little boy, about 5 or 6 years old. And since then, I've gone through most of the major storms, Hurricane Andrew in '92, and you have images of where, in my career, we were involved with the buildings up on the screen. The very first photograph, you get the eye of the storm up there. It looks like kind of the path of Milton, and the type of wind that you can see in the shot with the water and the wind and those palm trees. But the 3 buildings we were involved in during Wilma in 2005. First one is the Espiritu Santo Bank, that was what it was called back then. Now it's called Brickell Arch. When that building, which is the high-rise, a high-rise curtain wall system, it cost about $23 million to build the envelope of that building. And we were the threshold inspectors, and it cost $47 million to replace about 17,000 lights of glass from that Hurricane Wilma event. The building beside it, which is the Greenberg Torrent building, a great deal of glass was lost. About $4 to $5 million of glass had to be replaced. Both buildings and the Colonial looked as if a freight train had gone through it, or a 9/11 disaster. When getting to these buildings, there were still legal papers floating in the air from the damages associated to these buildings. All these buildings are back in operation again, and we were involved in at least in the first 2, Espiritu and Greenberg. We were involved in the restoration, which was in essence leaving all the frames and replacing simply the glass. The storm that's headed in our way, I think, is going to be fairly robust, but at wind speed between 140 to 180 miles per hour. There's a great deal of large and small missile impact, and oftentimes that damages to the glass. One of the reasons why we're still here is we can't go out to be part of this event until afterwards. And in the last 10 years or so, we've had to represent insurance companies in determining the extent of the damages associated to a storm such as the one that's going to hit us now, which is Milton. some of these storms, when they reach shore, they're very wet storms. Some push a great deal of water, and the type of flooding is enormous. But for the most part, there's a great deal of wind that could potentially damage the windows and doors, the envelope of the building. So things that have or categories that have improved in South Florida, and the kind of work we do is a great deal of insurance work in regards to these storms that hit the east and the west coast of Florida. Some of them are associated to the new changes in the Florida Building Code. The building that you're looking at is Champlain Tower. I was an expert on Champlain Tower after the collapse. This was a national story. I represented, the building that the film was taken from in this collapse. And as a result of this building, the Florida Building Safety Act has been enacted where buildings have to do a much better, these older buildings have to do a much better job of maintaining their exterior envelopes and making sure that things like this won't happen. So the objective of what we're doing now is to investigate the condition of buildings, but in a very scientific fashion, where we don't take anecdotal information, but we look at things from a statistical perspective, a quantifiable perspective, as well as a quantifiable as well as qualitative. All right. And so we found ourselves as a result of this, as experts in something that happens in Florida. There's specific statute in Florida, which is called the Chapter 558 rule, or the construction defect statute. And since there's an enormous amount of construction going on, we're involved in projects that there's 3 examples right now, which is Brickell City Center, which is in the heart of downtown, and there's a claim as to latent defects. The River Landing project, where there's a claim in defects, and the SLS Lux project. And when you have so much surface area and so many balconies and so many floors and so much area of product, we've had to figure out a way of taking an enormous amount of data from investigations that have to do with insurance, with association work, from large projects like this that are newly built to determine if there are latent defects or not, or the issues are anecdotal. We've had to take an enormous amount of information and put it together in such a way that we can extract conclusions and findings in a very in a deliberate and fast fashion, and conclude as to what problems a project may have. And so, for example, I think that the best analogy to me is how when patients are in a hospital, are determined to have some sort of pathology of cancer, for example, and the patient has to go through a series of biopsies, and the biopsies are explored with markers in the bloodstream to determine where the blood is moving, and And depending on the markers, and you can arrive at magnitude of the problem, and so that you can then arrive at a method of repair or a cure or a method to improve the patient's longevity, and make sure that you're not overreacting, which is what the doctors have to do. Is what is the degree or magnitude of a specific issue that is perceived, no? So the quality of the facts to determine what a specific pathology is has to be, in essence, accurate, highly detailed. That's an image of I like to draw. So you're looking at a photograph of something I drew with a great deal of detail in a very quick and efficient way. No, by the way, that's pen on paper. All right, there's no erasing there. So there's a certain degree of accuracy, but it sort of reflects who I am when I'm smiling. And some say, like Jorge, that I don't smile all the time, but when I do, there's something that has to be fairly humorous. And so how do you get enough facts together that you could paint the image of what's really going on with something, not based on outlier information, but a statistical representation that you can turn to and say, these are the facts, and I'm with a high degree of confidence certain that this is what's going to happen. And everyone out there has some sort of program where there is a way of doing inspections, and you can incorporate your findings and your photographs on a floor plan or an elevation, and that information is an enormous amount of information. But how do you synthesize that information? So George and I have created a model, a structure where we've created sufficient data points or markers, and we call them data points, but and like in a cancer treatment program it would be markers, but kind of the same, where we can look at those data points for specific things that we know will either perform or not perform during a storm, and whether there is injury to those items before or after the storm. And we can classify and codify these items or these data points, evaluate the strength of the information that we've discovered by determining the magnitude of each one of these things, and very importantly, ascribe the location, where precisely we can find these data points, and whether or not these data points at each one of these locations have a severity. So we've created a methodology where we identify information by sending out inspectors that are knowledgeable, and we ask them to examine a building based on location, evaluate specific data points that I refer to them as 21, turning 21. There are 21 points that we've come to the conclusion are markers that we can find on any building after a storm or during construction or after construction, where if those things are in generally good condition, it can represent, what the status of the building is at that time. Now we'll send out the evaluators or the inspectors with this format, and we'll have them look at the 21 points for each window or door, for example, in a high rise that's 60 or 70 stories, maybe 2 or 3 high rises, and we'll ask them to provide to uncover or recover, to get this data, bring it back to the office, and we have other people who are not part of that group incorporate that into a database. The database takes all of this information and it incorporates, aspects that are really important as to what people may have seen during an event, or what the complaints may be, what the observations by maintenance and the tickets that may exist in regards to perhaps leakage. And we'll take all that information and per location, we'll put that into in the database. We'll insert that like a code, and not necessarily trying to prescribe that as in a plan, but more in a synthesis of all that information to arrive at a graphic representation of that information. In the process, we arrive at an objective from what we've discovered to come up with a hypothesis of what may or may not have happened. A hypothesis is simply arriving at a statement of with certainty that is a yes or a no. And we develop enough statistical information to create a model of the entire project where we can, at the end of a analysis, determine a degree of confidence, say 95% degree of confidence that we have enough data points, and 5% human error to arrive at conclusions as to what may or may not have happened with the project, whether or not there is a latent defect of some sort, whether or not there could be problems in the future based on our gathering of information and synthesizing them. But it's really important also to understand that all of this is auditable and traceable. The strategy that we've had incorporates what is the potential of an omission, of a defect, a remedy to a defect, the lack of performance or the performance of a system, and the age of deterioration that something that we're looking at. We try to incorporate that in the magnitude and severity of the issues discovered. The collection of information will oftentimes take us from interviews, evaluation, data collecting to testing, and oftentimes to determine if there's an issue of water infiltration or structural damage of some sort. Testing is required, which is much more of a incisive kind of test, an in situ type of test to support a hypothesis one way or the other to determine if there's an issue with a data point collected. In all of this takes us to a place where once we have all that data gathered, traceability. And traceability is simply where I can come up with conclusions that another expert in my field can look at and say, you know what, generally I disagree or I agree with the findings of this expert. And that's very important because it's not about advocacy, it's about two experts kind of meeting, in the middle on something and say, there's enough information that I could either rely on it or not. And oftentimes in my field, there's a lot of decisions and judgments that are knee-jerk reactions to specific de minimis sort of miscellaneous items that stand out in specific locations of a building, but they don't represent tens of thousands of details that were installed properly or may not have been damaged or have worn the way you would expect a building that's 40 or 50 years old. This is the image that you see is of me looking at a wall where you can you notice that there's some degradation of the stucco and there's cracking. And it turns out that this is the clubhouse of a community of about 10 or 11 buildings. And if this was the only place that we were going to examine these cracks in the stucco after a hurricane, you might say that all the stucco of all the buildings were in this level of disrepair. Once we did our investigation and we took all of our sample size and we analyzed it, this was in essence the only place the stucco was damaged. And so that would be a big number if you had to replace all the stucco on nine buildings plus the clubhouse. And in this case, for whatever reason, the clubhouse building and was in the direct direction of the wind, and that's where the cracking happened. And the work was anecdotal that had to be done to this building after hurricane. The 21 items that we look at, it goes into a whole format of establishing numerically what these 21 items are. The 21 items are given a number. That number is something you could count. How many times a joint or crack in a frame is opened up, or how many deformed pieces of aluminum in a door or window were discovered. You may have thousands of windows and doors, and there may have been 2 or 3 that a crack or the frames had deformed. That doesn't represent the entire building, and you don't have to change every single window and door in the building. All you have to do is replace those at those specific locations. Now we find ourselves in that position where we do an analysis, we take all of this information, and we tabulate it, and we can create a profile of what we've discovered. And this is sort of a mapping of one specific item in those 21 where we could say, well, there was some damage, but this is repairable. You don't have to, take out every single window and door because you found a few examples, 7 in this case, of damage, and that there was no real reflection of a hurricane going through a specific location. This is a chart of the 21 categories. The 21 categories have a unit number that's categorized so that, for example, glass. Well, if you have multiple glass breaks or hundreds of glass breaks, there's a really pretty good chance that there was a hurricane that went through a specific area. But if you only have 1 or 2 broken lights of glass, and they could have been from a rock that was thrown from a lawnmower, you can't count that as a hurricane related because there's no pattern. And in the process of traceability, just taking information numerically and adding them up, you can determine, what types of failures or what types of damages exist, and create a pattern sufficiently where you can graph it. And this is a reflection of the map that is easily understood as to the extent of damage from a hurricane. And so that if you had damage, where's that damage, and does it start to line up with the prevailing winds of the hurricane or of a hurricane? And so, for example, South Florida, you would know, most of us know that storms come in from the southeast. So if there's a pattern, the pattern should be there's most of the damage in the southeast side of the building, that there would be very, very little on the north side. And you can start actually creating a quick and fast way of representing the damages and what those damages represent. And so, in conclusion, I think that the objective of the work that we've done over the past with George in the last 7, 8 years, is to have information that reflects the totality of a project versus just some of the anecdotal issues that oftentimes they're very loud, but they don't represent the totality of a project. And people look at that and they those issues that may come up and say, well, this had to have been a storm. Well, the other 21 items that have to do with glass breakage or sealant pulling away or stucco starting to deteriorate with cracks and damages like that, and framing members that are broken. If there isn't a pattern of all of it, then more than likely the things that you're looking at are just ordinary wear and tear. And so we've been able to successfully prevail when we've discovered that there's windows and doors that have to be completely replaced on a project. And in other cases, we've just simply said, yeah, there has been some damage, but they're associated to small things that can just simply be repaired. It's not the same for, to take out a line of glass and put a light in because a kid threw a ball through the glass, to have to replace the entire window and frame for something that's so simplistic as that. And so we find ourselves in that position of, can we just change out the component, of something that's minor that might be actually wear and tear, or do we have to change out all the windows or most of the windows because, in fact, there was a hurricane that has deformed the windows and they no longer are any good, and arrive at conclusions that we could provide others so that they can see, how we arrived at our conclusions, and that it's traceable. So, I don't know, George, is there anything that I may have missed?
No, you said everything about traceability, and is the new concept that we have to bring to the construction field.
Yep.
I just want to add that the traceability is an original term that was used for trade, for commerce, and now it's a possibility to add it to our field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that George has reminded me the last week or so that this idea of traceability was first directed to in the field of the supply chain. People want to know where their things are in the supply chain. So I think that's a good example of traceability. Where are the diapers that my kid needs? Where in the supply chain can I find that, or the baby food, or now with the hurricane in Asheville, where are the generators that are on their way? That traceability becomes extremely important in the food supply. That food is safe, and how long has that food been out there before it actually spoils? Traceability is really important. Well, as George and I have discovered, it's very convincing to an audience or a witness or where you could persuade someone that you have enough data to prove one way or the other that a hurricane has actually damaged a building sufficiently that you have to replace every single window and door for millions of dollars, or that there's a defect that you could find in hundreds of windows and doors in 2 or 3 towers of a new high-rise that's gone up because there's a latent defect that you can find over and over and over again, or not. The other way is true, that there may be something more associated to maintenance, right? And so is it traceable? Can you reflect that? And the causes are completely different. Whereas one group of people could say, no, it's hurricane related. And another group of people could say, it's wear and tear. How do you prove that with sufficient specificity in a short period of time where the information is traceable. And that's how we arrived at turning 21. And that's what we were presenting today to Facade Tectonics, and we're grateful to be here. And unfortunately, we were looking forward to visiting with you in person, and we'll need to catch on the flip side of this thing next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.